Morning, folks. Everything new under the sun. I'm not making this up. This is an article from Zero Hedge. Bernanke says the U.S. economy is going to go off the cliff in 2020. He's the previous Federal Reserve chairman, of course. And incredible information here. He thinks it's going down. Let's see what this article says and what he really said himself. And there's a ton of economic articles on zerohedge.com, just all pointing, to the decrease in the economy and the fact that the economy is headed for a cliff. It's going to go down fast. There's just a trigger point that it's waiting upon, basically some trigger thing to cause the cascade of events to occur. The article starts here. Recall earlier this week we reported in the May 31st Daily Observations letter to select clients, the world's biggest hedge had an ominous, if not dire, appraisal of the current economic financial situation facing the U.S. and concluded that we are bearish on almost all financial assets. Now, that's one of the bigger videos I just did last couple of days here about the hedge fund predicting that the economy is going to tank effectively. I think that video has about 10,000 views at this point, 9,000, something like that. And so in addition to this, Bernanke comes out saying similar. He goes on, while Ray Dalio's co-chief investment officer listed several specific reasons for the unprecedented bearishness, noting that markets are already vulnerable as the Fed is pulling back liquidity and raising rates, making cash scarcer and more attractive, pointing out that the options pricing reflects little investor demand for protection against potential for the economy to bubble over, and also shows virtually no chance of deflation. What really spooked Bridgewater is what happens in 2020. So they're putting a timeline on this thing. Ben Bernanke thinks it's going to go down by 2020, when the impact from the Trump stimulus peaks and goes into reverse. Jensen wrote, while such strong conditions would call for further Fed tightening, there's almost no further tightening priced in beyond the end of 2019. We're near 2018 right now. We're halfway through it. Things are getting coming to a climax here. Things are peaking. This is really the build-up prior to the 7-year tribulation, prior to the revealing of the Antichrist. I think that's a very possible situation. We only have about 3 years before the 7-year tribulation, probably shorter than that at this point. This seems to imply an unsustainable set of conditions, given that the government deficits will continue growing even after the fiscal stimulation and the Fed is scheduled to continue unwinding its balance sheets. The result of the hedge fund's now infamous conclusion, again part of the previous video, is that we are bearish on financial assets as the U.S. economy progresses toward the late cycle. Liquidity has been removed. Markets are pricing in a continuation of recent conditions, status quo basically, sunny skies, despite the changing backdrop. And you look at the price of oil, the increase in war tensions, etc. The markets are not pricing these in properly. They think everything is going to be awesome, basically. Bernanke, the same man who once charged a room full of bankers $250,000 each for the sage projection that interest rates would never normalize during his lifetime, now believes the U.S. economy, which in May entered the second longest period of expansion in modern history, is headed for a wily coyote moment in 2020, just in time for Trump re-election. Interesting that it's just in time for Trump re-election. What is that wily coyote moment? That is the moment when wily coyote runs off the cliff and keeps running, but then he looks down and realizes he's not on the cliff anymore and he's about to fall. Speaking at the American Institute, Enterprise Institute, Bernanke echoed Bridgewater's biggest concern about the sugar high facing the U.S. economy for the next 18 months. There we have a timeline again. This fits in with my 10 years left, basically in the history of the earth, and about 3 years for the 7-year tribulation. This all fits in the timeline. Saying that the stimulative impact of Trump's $1+ trillion fiscal stimulus makes the Fed's job more difficult all around, because it's happening at a time of very low unemployment. It also means that more supercharged economy gets thanks to fiscal stimulus, the greater the fall will be when the hangover hits. Bernanke said, "What you are getting at is a stimulus at the very wrong moment. The economy is already at full employment," he says. Thing is, they need stimulus basically to pay the interest on the debt. Stealing further from Bridgewater, note Bernanke said that while stimulus is going to hit the economy in a big way this year and next year, and then in 2020, wily coyote is going to go off the cliff. It's going to look down just when the U.S. economy collides on with what Bridgewater called an unsustainable set of conditions. It's a pretty dire warning if you're paying attention, if you're listening to what this article is saying, and not what this article is saying, what Bernanke is saying himself. He's warning effectively of an impending economic doom in a year's time, a 2020 time limit when all these things converge. And you have all this, and this doesn't include all the other trigger events like Middle East war and or trade wars, tariff stuff happening with China, the U.S., European Union. The European Union is set to invoke a couple $1 billion in trade tariffs. I forget exactly what the number was. There's a number of articles about that. They're looking at implementing something. China's trying to stave off the tariffs by suggesting that they're going to buy $70 billion worth of U.S. goods in hopes that Trump won't implement the trade tariffs. The trade tariffs, again, are what were one of the, if not the, trigger point for the 1929 collapse, which the politicians started talking about prior to 1929, but then the markets priced in because they saw this thing coming and moving into law effectively. And so you look at the tariffs, and if history repeats itself, it's shown itself to repeat itself. Empires come and go, economic troubles come and go, and they're often all caused by similar things, if not the same things. And so you have these tariffs in place, and these tariffs could easily cause this trigger event to happen before 2020. It goes on here. The irony is delightful. After all, it was Bernanke who consistently blamed Congress for not doing enough to jumpstart the economy. And now Congress, the government is doing it. And now Bernanke is blaming the government effectively. It is the same Bernanke who 3 years later is now blaming President and Congress for doing too much. So now Congress is doing too much when Bernanke was blaming them for not doing enough. It says Congress is largely responsible for incomplete recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. Ben Bernanke said, the former Federal Reserve head. Mr. Bernanke, who left the Fed in January 2014 after 8 years as chairman, says the Fed's response to the crisis was bold and effective, but insufficient. It says, I often said that monetary policy was not a panacea. We needed Congress to do its part, he says. After the crisis he calmed, that help was not forthcoming. And now that Congress has more than done its part, Bernanke predicts economic collapse under 2 years. Pretty fascinating stuff. With the convenient scapegoat currently in the White House, and of course the Democrats love it and they want to see a crash under Trump, and certainly the one person who assured that the bursting of the current asset bubble will be nothing short of spectacular, Ben, subprime is contained Bernanke, will be more than happy to place all the blame on the upcoming economic crash on who else but Donald Trump. Said otherwise, unlike his successor, Janet Yellen, who famously said after leaving office that she believes there won't be another financial crisis in her lifetime, Bernanke just predicted that the entire economy will nosedive in just 2 short years, far less than the 10 years of additional uninterrupted expansion recently forecast by the CBO. Bloomberg reporter pointed out the irony in the Fed officials blaming the Trump tax cuts for doing too much to bolster the economy. When POTUS, President of the United States, was on the campaign trail, he said the U.S. economy was all a big bubble being propped up by the Fed's low rates. And now, of course, the Fed is saying it's all a big bubble being propped up by the POTUS tax cuts. Incredible here. I am not going to speak as loosely as Ben did, it says, when he made the wily coyote reference and what happens to the economy in 2020, because the central bankers bursting central bankers, the bursting of the multi-trillion bubble they helped create and the tragic consequences it will have on the economy is just that, a joke. The only good news is that they will at least get to blame Trump. So there's people who don't disagree with this, effectively. And Trump, who apparently is one of the top economic people in the country. I mean, he was the Federal Reserve Chairman for 8 years. He's supposed to know what he's doing. He's supposed to know what he's saying. He predicts economic collapse in 2 years. And again, that there's nothing built into that nothing built into that that includes the trigger events, the Middle East wars, the other events, the other prophetic things happening, natural disasters which could trigger an economic downturn and therefore trigger a collapse. He's not taking any of that into the equation. Basically, he's just saying, based on the existing economy as it is, it can't sustain itself past 2020. Pretty incredible. Wily coyote moment. When does the U.S. look down? I think they're there right now. I think they're running over air right now. When do they look down and realize this is unsustainable? When does the rest of the public look down and say this is unsustainable, and confidence is completely lost, and then you have a total and complete economic collapse? I've said it before. I think an economic collapse is the one thing that could catapult us into end-time Bible prophecy very quickly. If that occurs, then you have reason for why there's no Western governments in Ezekiel 38. You have reasons why there's no major Western governments specified in Bible prophecy. All you have left are the dictatorships, the Middle East countries, who are effectively standing on their own. Because in an economic collapse, it's the communist countries that are still going to be standing. It's the ones ruled by military dictatorship and by fear that are going to be standing still through an economic collapse. Any Western nation, any first world nation is going to be in the worst case scenario. It's going to be Mad Max there because they don't know how to grow vegetables. They don't know how to exist in a world where, there's no electricity, etc. You go into these second and third world countries, they're going to be standing because they're not going to see a huge difference when the economy collapses. They're just going to continue bartering, growing vegetables, and being poor generally as they are now. Pretty significant stuff, guys. Be prepared. This is another reason why you need to be wise. You need to be prepared. You need to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior because He's coming soon. Get saved and get food and water. Become a prepper. You may not want to call yourself that, but it's wise to do so in the current conditions that we see. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.